Good morning to Europe and good afternoon to Asia. A warm welcome to all participants at this Jean Monnet lecture on Europe and the Indo-Pacific strategy, connectivity at its core, presented by the Jean Monnet Chair on EU-Asia Connectivity here at the Faculty of East Asian Studies at Ruhr-Universität Bochum at Ruhr in Germany. Today's lecture will cover a lot of ground. The Indo-Pacific spans from the east coast of Africa to the Pacific Islands. In April this year, the Council of the European Union adopted an EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And this strategy states that the EU should reinforce its strategic focus, presence, and actions in the Indo-Pacific. Already in September 2018, the EU had published its EU-Asia Connectivity Strategy, also emphasizing the need for intensified engagement in the region. And last week, the European External Action Service and the US State Department expressed a shared interest in improving connectivity by supporting partners in the region as part of their respective approaches to the Indo-Pacific. Currently, as we speak, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, the Vice President of the European Commission, is visiting Indonesia. And tomorrow, Josep Borrell will give a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta on the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. However, before the HR will deliver his speech in Jakarta, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Ambassador M.Reiterer to deliver his lecture on the topic of Europe and the Indo-Pacific strategy, connectivity at its core. M.Reiterer is Distinguished Professor at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy of the Brussels School of Governance, and he is also the editor of this Center's Policy Brief series. In his diplomatic and academic career, he focused on especially EU-Asia relations, also on EU foreign policy and relations, especially particularly with Japan and Korea, interregionalism, security issues, new forms of diplomacy, human rights, and he also published extensively on international trade law and relations, including the World Trade Organization, Trade and Environment, and ASEM, the Asia-Europe meeting. In September 2020, he retired from the European Diplomatic Service, that is the European External Action Service, as Ambassador Plenipotentiary and Extraordinary of the European Union to the Republic of Korea. Previous posts included Ambassador to Switzerland and the Principality of Liechtenstein, Deputy Head of Mission, Minister at the EU delegation to Japan, and also Counselor in charge of ASEM at the European Commission. That was back in from 1998 to 2001. I would like to invite Ambassador Reiterer to share his screen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join you as usual in these times virtually. virtually in Europe, virtually in Asia. Good afternoon to everybody. It's my pleasure to take up an issue which I think has become a topical, but as just to avoid any misunderstanding of Professor Bersick's reference to the HRVP, I am not in competition with him and his lecture, which he will give tomorrow. I will give you just my personal view, having worked, as Sebastian said, in the area and on these issues. What I will try to do is to touch on these 5 issues, basically, to see, is there anything really new for the EU with this Indo-Pacific? What are the interests of the European Union? And as it is an area far away, but also very important, with whom to cooperate? What can the EU achieve? Or can it play a role? Or perhaps can it even lead? And what is the value added by the EU when it comes to connectivity? So this is the game plan. And I hope we can then pick up many of the issues which I have not touched upon in the discussion. Well, as one of my arguments certainly is that this is not entirely new for the European Union. For decades, the EU has been issuing various Asia strategies and guidelines. It is the long-standing dialogue partner of ASEAN. It has participated since 1994 as the EU and not its member states in the ASEAN Regional Forum. It set up together with ASEAN the Asia-Europe meeting in 1996 as a dialogue forum. The EU has concluded 5 out of 11 strategic partnerships with Asian countries, as well as lately with ASEAN as an international organization. At the time, the European Union already concluded the most advanced free trade agreement at the time with Korea. This label has now been passed on to the Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan, and the EU is negotiating FTAs with most ASEAN countries, as well as Australia and New Zealand, and has agreed to start negotiating with India. In addition, high-level representatives of the EU have started to regularly attend the Pacific Island Forum. When it comes to investment, I think everybody is aware of the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, which was concluded last December, but which has fallen prey now in this exchange of sanctions between China and the European Union. Talking about China, specific China strategies are regular policy tools too. The 2019 EU-China Strategic Outlook introduced this famous triptych that China is a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival, and a distinction which has been adopted by other partners too. Already the 2016 global strategy outlining the comprehensive approach of the EU underlined the interconnectedness of Europe and Asia in many areas as a function of globalization and the ensuing need to tackle global problems and challenges together. Security has been explicitly labeled as indivisible between Europe and Asia. And a policy paper, which is in the process of implementation, called Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia, concretized this concept. Led by France, in its 2018 Indo-Pacific strategy, France regards itself as part of the Indo-Pacific because of its territories in the region. France has the second largest exclusive economic zone of the world in the region. There are French citizens present in the Indo-Pacific, and there is French military hardware in the region. This all had contributed to heightening the security awareness of the EU for the Indo-Pacific. Thus, Germany and the Netherlands published their thinking on the Indo-Pacific and invited the European Union to come up with a common EU view. A first draft was published in April 2021. After discussion, a final version is envisaged for September of this year. But also in the field of security, I have already mentioned the ARF, the EU can also build on ongoing operations off the coast of Somalia, the Operation Atalanta, to secure neuralgic shipping lanes between Asia and Europe. On a similar task, the EU is considering extending Crimario from the Indian Ocean to South and Southeast Asia to secure sea lanes, which is necessary to maintain the connectivity between Asia and Europe. Well, if you take all this together, I would argue there is no discovering of new oceans or areas by the European Union, but rather a recognition of a shift of focus to reinforce, as it is mentioned in the strategy. South Asia and the Indian Ocean have indeed moved up in the awareness, perhaps for three reasons. As part of the geopolitical shift. Secondly, because the power competition is playing out in the region, and also a nascent, more active role of the main regional power in South Asia, India. Well, what are the interests of the European Union? I think in this fact sheet, which was published by the External Action Service, that gives a very good overview. And the Indo-Pacific will also be important in the post-COVID-19 recovery. There, again, China will play an important role because its economy is forecasted to increase quite considerably, which will be beneficial to the region, but also for Europe, which has very close economic ties with China. It's not only the economies which are connected, but also the supply chains. Furthermore, politically, I think the EU has no interest in the long run to have two conflict areas at the same time with China and with Russia. Perhaps it is useful to recall that the European Union, Russia, and China share the Eurasian continent and have therefore a sort of inbuilt interest to work together and to create security and not insecurity. From a geopolitical strategy point of view, it would also not make sense from the European point of view to push China and Russia closer together. These two countries are cooperating in many areas of foreign policy, but nevertheless, they have different interests, China has taken on, has surpassed the Russian economy in size and sophistication, and has upscaled its economy and technology. But of course, we are also in this process of re-evaluating our relationship with China, because the expectation that with joining the WTO in 2002, this will lead not only to economic development, but also to political change, that has not materialized. So, because of this close relationship, I think the EU attitude to China will be slightly different from the United States, which was talking about extreme competition. The European Union normally prefers cooperation over tensions, while mindful of these three elements or characteristics of China, which I have already mentioned. That policy is also somehow applied to to Russia. Well, it brings us to this difficult situation in which the European Union finds itself very often, balancing a value-based foreign policy with economic and strategic interests will never result in black and white, but in various shades of gray. Furthermore, one also has to add the technological dimension. The competition for the lead in tomorrow's technologies, also labeled the fourth industrial revolution, is very much part of the competition or tensions also between the US and China. 5G is just one of the technologies. Others are artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, quantum computing, space technology, biotechnology, and you can add more. However, let me just underline, the EU needs to get to the forefront of digital tech and digitization to shape the future. Vice President Vestager just contributed a very interesting policy brief, which we have published a few days ago, where she's making that point very strongly. Because staying in the front or catching up requires investment and protection of critical infrastructure to build and maintain the power base, which will be essential for the rest of this century. So where are the partners now? Well, first, is there a point in extending the Atlantic Partnership with the US to the Indo-Pacific? Cooperation of allies needs concrete common interests as an engine in addition to systemic principle and value-based considerations. So therefore, the restarting of consultations between the European Union and the United States is so important. That also applies to the planned Transatlantic Technology Council that will need, but it will need to take a global view in the interest of both partners and timely consultations ex ante and not just at post. Japan is a valued partner with similar interests in the region, and Japan has changed gear to a more active foreign policy, the resurrection of the Quad, saving the faltering TPP and a free trade agreement after President Trump's withdrawal. The Japanese quality infrastructure is a robust contribution to infrastructure needs and demonstrates this newly developed sense for geopolitics. On a different scale, that also applies to Korea, a major economy and technology hub, sharing the peninsula with nuclear North Korea, where for 4 years of Trump added just show and no substance in terms of denuclearization or a final peace settlement. ASEAN. Having supported ASEAN-centered system over decades through the long-standing and wide-ranging EU-ASEAN dialogue, the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific offers the EU a platform to build on with an association which itself is anchored in cooperation. India has joined the Quad, but is still working on the concept as its security outlook so far was primarily land-based. Well, there is often talk now whether this Indo-Pacific strategy is also an expression of strategic autonomy of the European Union. Well, how have we got there? Well, many allies, including the United States, including the European Union, have learned that despite an alliance status, don't take a partner for granted. So therefore, this rebuilding of relationship is important in order to overcome tensions which have been created, but also in order to create trust and confidence again. So this strategic autonomy is the label under which this discussion is taking place. However, it's perhaps not the best coinage of an expression, because one has always to add It's not against NATO, nor is it trying to replace or double NATO, nor does it signify the retreat from the world by the European Union, no move to isolation or autarky, and no program for protectionism. However, the EU has to ensure, and that's the definition I prefer, a capacity to act alone, if need be, but remain open, engaged with partners as the rule. This paradigm is to stay, but reflects a shift in attitude and engagement in terms of investing in comprehensive security by the European Union. In the paper on the Indo-Pacific, these 7 areas were defined as areas for potential cooperation. And there you see that connectivity is one of these issues. There, what the EU can build on connectivity on its policy paper, which was already published in 2019 and to which Professor Bersick referred. This concept was inspired by a broader approach and not just an approach to infrastructure, which is also important in the Indo-Pacific context. It is, of course, also physical infrastructure, and there the European Union has a long-standing experience in setting up the trans-European networks in Europe. It is also based on economics. I have referred to FTAs and investment agreements, but also the human dimension, intellectual exchange, people to people, research and development in order to stay abreast of cutting edge and emerging technologies. And of course, also the rule of law and a value-based approach is important. So these are all areas, including digital and energy, which are part of the ongoing Sino-US competition. But I think it's also an area where the European Union can step in and define its policy based on multilateralism, openness and inclusiveness, and therefore cooperation, rule of law, values and principles, including a human-centered technology, which means a technology which serves human beings and not the other way around. There is also, talking of the European Union, a certain tendency for soft institutionalization, drawing on the decade-long experience of setting up and managing the trans-European networks, which I have mentioned. According to which rules and standards this all will happen is part of this ongoing competition, and let me underline that it's decisive. In this area, foreign policy can make important contributions to prosperity and security, often below the radar of the public. What is called the Brussels effect lays wrath to this field of fierce competition. Furthermore, there is a tendency, like in the Belt and Road Initiative, to bilateralize connectivity, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. But this occurs when connectivity projects are used for political purposes, thereby focusing on strengthening of bilateral infrastructure as opposed to interconnected multilateral networks. So if a project serves to export national standards to create dependencies, if projects have strings attached in terms of use of procurement, if they carry harsh financial conditions and leave the sustainability and the people-to-people aspect aside, it will not match the requirements of the European Union. Building this human-centered digital ecosystem with partners globally needs an all-in policy approach and should be the guiding principle in building sustainable connectivity. Multilateralism, of course, with EU characteristics acts as a guiding principle and is open and encompassing, not minilateral, favoring groupings like Quad, whether plus or not. In order for multilateralism to be effective, democracy, rule of law, and the level playing fields have to be established. This is slightly different from the EU, but also the Chinese views. Well, can the EU lead, or what could it do? Well, I think the EU could offer the lead and guidance in setting up an Indo-Pacific connectivity scheme based on horizontally connected partnerships. A start has been made with a partnership with Japan, but that can only be the beginning. Korea and India signaled an interest too, but I think developing a multilateral, interconnected, networked approach as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, that could be a contribution of the European Union. ASEAN would be a regional partner. Therefore, there the EU could also honor its support, which was always proclaimed for ASEAN centrality, and in offering these possibilities, facilitate balancing and hedging for ASEAN members, which is a policy option which is liked. That would also apply to Korea and its northern and southern policies. An overall functional approach to connectivity could also be helpful in view of future developments in North Korea, which is still sealing off South Korea from the Eurasian continent. This multilateral approach would also avoid the mentioned minilateralism of the Quad. A sort of directorate does not click the boxes for an open connectivity concept which creates trust and connectivity beyond physical infrastructure. Therefore, the open-ended cooperative approach would take out the containment element, which does not sit well with a multilateral approach to connectivity. By definition, it would be inclusive for all those who want to play along and, important, respect agreed rules. It would strive to create synergies among the various existing connectivity schemes, whatever their exact names. It would not be directed against anybody, but should be devised in a manner that it becomes in the interest of all participants. It should lead to a more efficient use of the scarce resources, be linked to post-COVID-19 recovery schemes, and to rebuild better also in view of climate change engagements, which all partners in the region have taken on. It could also build on cooperation with regional development banks, import banks, and the European Investment Bank could play a larger role in the financing. In sum, and that's a little bit that's the conclusion, develop a new form of sustainable Indo-Pacific connectivity network of partnerships, which is open, functional, project-based, pooling experience and financing, which is also implemented in a transparent manner according to green and digital standards used by international development banks, could become a central, but of course not the only part of EU engagement in the Indo-Pacific, bringing EU added value to the table. Work done in the intercontinental framework of the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM Sustainable Connectivity, could also be taken on board, demonstrating once more inclusiveness and openness and making good use of existing reflections and structures. So this is an area where the EU could draw on its strengths and experience, which in turn would lend it credibility. The EU might also be the only player which can pull off an integrated, inclusive, and cooperative project in the Indo-Pacific, which in turn could facilitate understandings or solutions in other, even more contentious areas. Thus, having connectivity at the core and emerging technology in the mind is a policy for area for the EU I would propose to develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this presentation, which was well included many facts that certainly, especially for our students, shows the complexity in terms of institutions, in terms of issues, in terms of actors, that this aspect of international relations, that is especially EU-Asia affairs and the role of the Indo-Pacific and connectivity brings with it. When we think of the complexity, obviously there is an additional aspect here, and that is what the European Union wishes and offers, so to speak, and at the same time what the Indo-Pacific expects from the European Union, and how it reacts to those to this developing agenda. And here I was wondering in how far the European Union is actually welcomed as an actor. I mean, the EU so far is not a member of the East Asian Summit. It's not a member of the ASEAN ADMM Plus. Aren't these all? The EU is neither a member of the of RCEP or any other multilateral free trade areas and agreements that develop in the region, that are developed in the region. So there is also disconnectivity, so to speak. And how to bridge this? That is a very central aspect, certainly. And it would be interesting to hear your views here. However, let me also emphasize that the audience is asked to pose questions, to raise questions via the Q&A function here, the chat Q&A function, and please do so.
Well, Sebastian, to reply to your question, well, I have tried on purpose to show a little bit the complexity, because if there's complexity, there are no easy solutions. And I think what the European Union should do now in further developing its Indo-Pacific strategy is to turn it into a real strategy, which means you make an analysis, what are your interests, you define your goals, and you give yourself the toolbox, the instruments in order to realize these goals. And what I was trying to suggest is that the European Union should not take the famous Christmas tree approach and put everything which is nice and desirable on it, but select a few issues where the European Union has credibility. And therefore I have chosen connectivity as one, and as I said, not the only one, but as one area where the European Union can show it can show the single market. It can show the trans-European networks, which I mentioned, which means the connectivity by road, by plane, by train, by sea lanes, that has developed. the freedom of movement, people connectivity, the Erasmus program, the Horizon Europe research program as part of this large approach. I think this is connectivity where the European Union is strong. There is, of course, always the danger of this expectation gap. But exactly for that reason, I am arguing, let's choose a few areas where we have credibility and where we can deliver. It is true that the European Union is not a member of the East Asia Forum ADM+. It was working towards it. But look, nowadays, after 4 years of President Trump, the level of attention has gone considerably down. President Obama went to all these meetings, and now we have to recalibrate a little bit. And I referred to Quad plus, to minilateralism. Minilateralism can play a role in a regional context, but I think in this larger context, I prefer a multilateral approach. When it comes to the economic trade investment relations, yes, I think the European Union has to pay attention what is going on in the region with these two slightly competing regional agreements. They are quite different, by the way, in nature. The successor to the TPP is much more in-depth compared to the RCEP, but the European Union is not sitting idle. There are already free trade agreements, and as I have mentioned, others are under negotiation. And there's also the commitment of the European Union to conclude a free trade agreement with ASEAN. So but we have to make sure that if we have so many free trade agreements, that they are compatible with each other. Therefore, it's so important also to get the WTO system up and running again. And I have negotiated in my former life once rules of origin in the World Trade Organization. And I can tell you, with rules of origin, you can make sure that free trade agreements don't create free trade any longer. So this is an area where we have to pay attention to. And I would also take issue that the European Union is not of interest to Asian Pacific partners or Indo-Pacific partners. I think quite on the contrary. If you see all these activities which I have listed, there is an interest, and the European Union brings more of a stability, the economic cooperation, the importance of rule of law. I mean, what is the problem in many of the contentious areas? Take South China Sea. It's the rule of law. And there the European Union, I think, adds to stability. And in some of the surveys, opinion surveys which I have seen, the attitude towards the European Union is actually quite positive. And not being part of this great power competition, I think offers a possibility to reach out to partners who don't want to choose between the United States and China and get caught in between. We all know the elephants and the grass.
Yes, indeed, and this is something that also the audience is interested in, very much so, and questions do refer to the Quad, for instance, and the question of and your views on the EU and the Indo-Pacific Quad and its impact on maritime security, especially given the growing assertiveness of the People's Republic of China. We all know that the Indo-Pacific is also contains trade routes, right? Maritime trade passes through its oceans. 60% of world trade and a third through the South China Sea. So here, obviously, the Europeans do have an interest. And what impact will it have of their room of maneuvers if they are not part of the party?
Well, I think the European Union is part of the party. It's even an interested party, because these trade routes should and have to remain open. And I have already referred to the engagement of the European Union concerning the situation off the coast of Somalia, which is a chopping point and extremely important. If you check on the map, it's a crucial point. Then in the draft Indo-Pacific strategy, you see that there's the proposal to extend the patrolling of the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean to South and Southeast Asia. You have a strong commitment of France, which is certainly also the leading factor, also militarily. I do remember when I participated in 2016 in the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, that the Charles de Gaulle, the aircraft carrier, was in Singapore at the same time, a very good and powerful message. And you see the thinking and the rising awareness, which I have referred to in my presentation of the security, that also Germany will send a frigate into the region, which is not an expression of military power or hardware. It is a diplomatic act. And I think this is the reason why the announced sending of one single frigate gets so much attention, because it is diplomacy. It's not a military operation, and is not meant to be. So I think there the European Union makes a contribution. When it comes to the Quad, I mean, we are talking right now about Quad 2. The first Quad, which was revived by Japan, originated in joint efforts to come to secure after the tidal wave in Southeast Asia. Then it disappeared a little bit, and now it is coming back. I think the Quad members have cautiously approached it in a functional cooperation manner. And I think which leaves the door open to participants of other countries or groups which are not yet part of the Quad. As a multilateralist, I was arguing, I'm always a little bit skeptical if minilateral approaches are meant to cover huge areas, and the Indo-Pacific is a huge area. So it can be part of a puzzle perhaps, but I think it would be too big as one piece of a puzzle to cover the whole Indo-Pacific. So I think therefore, I was arguing for this multilateral approach, for this functional approach, taking out what is in common. And I think connectivity, whatever it is called, is a common feature which could serve as a base for confidence building, for cooperation. And once you have achieved that, you can also extend cooperation much easier into other areas.
Yeah. Obviously, the United States of America is an important player here and actor here. A couple of questions are referring to the especially the relations between the People's Republic of China and the US, and how this impacts on the EU. So how much support can the US expect from the EU with regard to the competition with China, especially now that under with the Biden administration, no qualitative change apparently is taking place. This is one area that well, would be wonderful to hear your views on.
Well, I think I have devoted a policy brief to that subject too, to make a small commercial. I think there is a lot of potential, but based on the experience which we made, I think the partnership between the European Union and the United States has to be put on a new footing. And I think that's what the European Union is striving at. And I refer again, also I don't like the expression, to the strategic autonomy. We have to define our own interests in relation to China. The 2019 approach with partner, competitor, and systemic rival has to be applied. So there is not one size fits all answer. You have to see where does it, in which area it belongs. It belongs. I have mentioned that I think European Union is not out for an all-out competition with China across the board. Therefore, we have this triptych. But we have to reevaluate the position of China. I referred to 2002 when China joined the World Trade Organization, and has developed ever since. Now we have to deal with a stronger partner, a partner which is more assertive, and therefore we have to choose our answers according to the subject matter, without forgetting our principles, values, and convictions. Therefore, we will have many shades of gray, I think, as I called them. But the answer certainly is not to go 100% with the United States and 100% against China. That would be unwise and would not be in the interest of the European Union. And therefore, I see all these policy papers to which I have referred, including this Indo-Pacific strategy we are talking about, as a tools, as a means to define that role, but a real extension of the transatlantic partnership to include also the Indo-Pacific would need work between the European Union and the United States. I think it's possible. In terms of technology, I have referred to this Technology Council. I think it's extremely important. And we already had, for the first time, again, bilateral consultations between the European Union and the United States on China. So we have to work, but we have to make sure that we talk about our mutual interests, define where we go along, and define where the European Union has a different approach and is offering the different approach to the partners in the Indo-Pacific.
Mm-hmm. There is a question that relates exactly to this general, well, to the strategic dimension, but asks for the very concrete implications, meaning that how to translate standards, the regulatory environment that the European Union wants to facilitate, rules, norms, standards, how to translate those into actual projects on the ground. Isn't this a main challenge for the EU when it comes to implementing the connectivity strategy? And in how far do commercial interests play into this and can help to roll out the strategy? That brings in the question, obviously, of private of the private sector.
I think the private sector is a key partner. I have seen that in all my postings, whether I was in Japan, whether I was in Korea, the European chambers in those countries were important partners to learn what is going on in the market and also to see how we can advance. But I mean, take the GDPR. GDPR has become a sort of world standard for data protection. And I think there the European Union has made a contribution in providing a framework and then negotiating, talking with partners in order to make sure that there's an equivalency between the European level of protection and the Japanese level and the Korean level, for example. That does not mean that Japan and Korea have to adopt the European rules and regulations. However, we establish the same level of protection. And I think that's something which we have learned within the European Union, and we can extend that worldwide, working, of course, with the private sector. That can be in the manufacturing, according to which standards you are producing cars is important, and it's a competitive advantage if your standard is used worldwide, because then, to simplify, you produce one car and sell it worldwide. Similarly, in financial matters, if your stock market rules are accepted worldwide, then it is easier for a European company to go to the New York stock market and without the need to have a very costly and long procedure for adaptation. It is in the recognition, if we're talking about the free movement of persons, that you recognize academic credentials. Therefore, the Erasmus Plus is so important. So you really get into different sectors, and there the know-how of the European Union, I think, is key. Standard discussions are part of dialogues with practically each and every Asian country. And we are trying to push that because it is not very sexy. It's not an aircraft carrier, but it has a very strong impact. And I think that's something where you can be strong below the radar.
Yeah, speaking of aircraft carriers and the radar, there is a question in relation to the Republic of China on Taiwan, that is Taiwan. What is the EU's approach to Taiwan when it comes to the Indo-Pacific?
Well, as far as I know, but I'm not part anymore of the policy making. I mean, Taiwan is an important part of the European Union, and there was always support for Taiwan also to become part of functional international organizations. Especially now in the pandemic, it would be extremely useful if Taiwan could contribute also its experience. They were quite successful in handling the pandemic. There are strong economic relations. There's an economic office in Taipei. So it is a very broad relationship, and walking the tightrope as part of the One China policy is certainly a challenge for diplomacy. But I think we will manage. But we have to see how things are developing. When we look what was going on in Hong Kong, one has to be rather cautious. But I think it would therefore also be good to have China as a partner who is part of international relations in the large sense, from politics to international organizations, to supply chains, because the closer you are together, that helps. And right now, I mean, Taiwan and Korea, very important producers of semiconductors, and we see the sensitivity in economic terms, not to mention the political and security dimension of the problem.
Yeah. There is another security, there is another hotspot, so to speak, in East Asia when it comes to security, and that's the Korean Peninsula. There is a question in relation to the Korean Peninsula and the perspectives of denuclearization, especially now with the Biden administration, and obviously the question, the role of the European Union in here. Could you comment on this, please?
Well, this is of course a difficult area. Unfortunately, and I have mentioned it already, in the last 4 years, we did not make any progress. We got some interesting TV pictures, but no real progress in the denuclearization. On the contrary, I think the North Korean regime was using those 4 years to build up further arms and to develop technology. I mean, if I look back over the last years, what we have tried so far hasn't worked. So I think, therefore, it is a challenge for the United States and for Korea to come up with perhaps a new approach, which is more promising. What is called the Libyan approach: you denuclearize first, and then sanctions are lifted. Will not work. I think there is one has to see that North Korea regards nuclear deterrence as preserving the regime. And I think, building on that, a scheme which offers in a very concise manner the one step here, one step there, and a snap back if somebody is not playing to the rules, I think could be helpful. And that's what the European Union has already said several times. A multilateral approach, built a little bit, inspired. Situation is different by how the agreement with Iran was reached at the time, which was a multi-layered negotiating process on a technical level, on a political level. And I think that is something which could be a source of inspiration. Normally, multilateral negotiations offer more security than bilateral negotiations only, because if the two are blocked, then everything is blocked. If you're in a multilateral setting, you have a partner who can help. So I think there's an area where the European Union can be helpful if the partners want the European Union to play the role. Otherwise, it's not possible, to be very clear. And the European Union will not be the game changer, but if it could be a facilitator, because the others want it, I think this is a role which could be played.
Yes, and that is what a partnership then obviously defines. The time is already is nearing its end. There are still a couple of questions. One is referring to financial markets and the question of digitalization, and here especially the digital yuan and its impact on the Indo-Pacific, and the possibility of a digital euro to move into the picture. So this is then about partnership, competition, and rivalry between the EU and US when it comes to international currencies. Do you see this as an area of contestation or an area of cooperation when it comes to the EU and especially China, but also its like-minded partners?
Well, not being a financial expert, but from a political point of view, I would say the European Union has entered a new world at the time when the euro was created, because within a relatively short time, the euro became the second most important international currency. It has also become a reserve currency, always in addition to the dollar. There is more and more factoring of goods and services in euro, which is of course in the interest, because you take out the exchange risk for the parties concerned. I'm personally very much in favor of using the euro much better. But that needs some changes, which will not be easy in the setup. We don't have a real European finance minister. We have the European Central Bank, which is controlled and done by member states. So I think, but it should be the goal to increase the role of the euro as a transaction money and also as a reserve money, reserve currency, because that increases your economic leverage. And economic leverage is a strength of the European Union, being one of the largest economy in the world, biggest trader, biggest investor, and so on. So I think this is an area where in the future I could see that a European Export-Import Bank is set up, which would facilitate the life of European exporters, strengthen also the institutional role of those in charge of the euro. But that's a little bit music for the future. But it's always good to have some ideas and to work on them. But that's my rather political statement, and I'm sure the experts will tell me how difficult that all is, and I will dutifully agree.
And it yes, and it relates to the fact that the EU is not a nation state, that it is striving to increase its agency, and that there are 27 member states, and the
and not all of them are using the euro.
Not all of them are even, yes, and they are even not all of them are using the same currency. So the one voice is and remains key here. Also, when it comes to connectivity affairs and the Indo-Pacific now and in the future. Michael, I'd like to thank you for your insightful analysis and all those replies to the questions that were posed. Thank you very much to all of you who have proactively participated by asking questions, and obviously to those who did so actively by joining this Jean Monnet lecture series. We are all looking forward to welcoming you again soon. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay productive, and all the best here from Ruhr-University, Bochum, from Germany, from Europe to Asia. Bye-bye, and see you again soon.